Hello everyone, today we stand at the edge of Antietam Creek, a quiet stretch of water in rural Maryland that became the site of the single bloodiest day in all of American military history. On September the 17th, 1862, two armies clashed here in a battle that lasted just 12 hours but left a scar on the nation that would never fully heal. This is not just a story of bullets and bayonets, it is a story of reckless ambition, catastrophic intelligence, failures, paralyzing caution, and a single victory that would redefine the purpose of the Civil War and alter the fate of millions of enslaved people. By the time the sun set over Sharpsburg, nearly 23,000 American soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing more casualties than the combined losses of the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, and the Spanish-American War. To understand Antietam, we must first step back to the summer of 1862, when the Confederacy stood on the brink of international recognition and military collapse all at once. After the Confederate victory at the Second Battle of Bull Run, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, made a gamble that would change the war. Lee's army was exhausted, undersupplied, and outnumbered, but he believed a bold invasion of the North could break Union morale, secure much-needed food and supplies from Maryland's farmlands, and convince Britain and France to formally recognize the Confederate States of America. For European powers, supporting a fledgling nation fighting for independence seemed morally justifiable until that nation was fighting to preserve slavery. Lee's invasion was designed to change that narrative, to present the Confederacy as a viable, independent country capable of carrying the war into enemy territory. He split his outnumbered army into multiple detachments, a risky move that violated basic military principles, betting that Union General George B. McClellan would be too slow to respond. What Lee did not know was that his entire campaign plan, written as Special Order 191, would be abandoned by a Confederate courier and found by Union soldiers wrapped around 3 cigars in a Maryland field. This lost order was a gold mine. It revealed exactly where Lee's scattered divisions were positioned, how many men he had, and his goal to capture the Union garrison at Harper's Ferry before regrouping. When McClellan held the order in his hands, he reportedly exclaimed, "Here is a paper with which, if I cannot whip Bob Lee, I will be willing to go home." He had a crystal-clear blueprint to destroy Lee's divided army before it could reunite. Yet McClellan, a brilliant organizer but a timid battlefield commander, hesitated. He moved too slowly, giving Lee precious time to pull his forces back to the high ground near Sharpsburg, along the banks of Antietam Creek. By September the 16th, the two armies faced each other with Lee's outnumbered men, trapped against the Potomac River, with no room to retreat, a perfect position for destruction. The battle began at dawn on September the 17th, in thick, foggy darkness that hid the killing fields about to unfold. Union troops, under General Joseph Hooker, launched the first assault charging Confederate lines near the Dunker Church, a small white building that would become a symbol of the battle's horror. The fighting here was savage, hand-to-hand combat, with bayonets and rifle butts, as wave after wave of Union soldiers attacked and Confederate defenders held their ground. The cornfields between the lines turned red with blood, earning the name Bloody Lane, as bodies piled waist-high in the trenches. Men fell so fast that commanders could not replace them, and units were wiped out in minutes. By mid-morning, the Union had gained ground, but McClellan refused to commit his reserve forces, holding back tens of thousands of fresh troops that could have shattered Lee's lines. His fear of being ambushed or overextended crippled the Union's greatest advantage. As the battle shifted to the center, Confederate troops held a sunken road that became a death trap. Union attacks came in relentless waves, and the Confederates, trapped in the depression, were mowed down by rifle fire. The road, filled with bodies so thick that surviving soldiers had to climb over the dead to keep fighting. Meanwhile, on the Union left, General Ambrose Burnside delayed his attack for hours, struggling to cross a narrow bridge over Antietam Creek that would later bear his name. When his men finally crossed, they pushed the Confederates back to Sharpsburg, threatening to cut off Lee's only escape route. Just as victory seemed certain, Confederate General A.P. Hill arrived with his division, after a forced 15-mile march from Harper's Ferry, hitting Burnside's flank and driving the Union troops back. This last-minute reinforcement saved Lee's army from total annihilation. By late afternoon, the guns fell silent. The landscape was unrecognizable, fields covered in corpses, streams stained red, and wounded men crying out for help with no medics to aid them. Lee's army was broken with nearly a third of his men lost, but he held the field through the night. McClellan, despite having twice as many men and intact reserves, chose not to launch a final attack the next day. He let Lee retreat across the Potomac River back into Virginia, wasting the Union's best chance to end the war in 1862. Tactically, Antietam was a draw, but strategically, it was a decisive Union victory. Lee's first invasion of the North was crushed, ending any immediate hope of European recognition for the Confederacy. Britain and France, which had considered intervening, backed away once it was clear the Confederacy could not win a decisive victory on Northern soil. Most importantly, Antietam gave President Abraham Lincoln the political cover he desperately needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln had drafted the proclamation months earlier, but his cabinet warned him to wait for a Union victory to avoid looking desperate. Antietam's bloody win was that moment. On September the 22nd, 1862, Lincoln announced that all enslaved people in Confederate territory would be freed on January the 1st, 1863. This transformed the Civil War from a fight solely to preserve the Union into a moral crusade to end slavery. It galvanized anti-slavery support in the North, discouraged European intervention, and turned the tide of the war irrevocably in the Union's favor. For Lincoln, the carnage of Antietam was the terrible price of a moral victory that would redefine America's promise of freedom. The human cost of Antietam is almost impossible to fathom. Over 3,600 men were killed outright on that single day, with thousands more dying later from wounds or disease. Families across the North and South mourned sons, fathers, and brothers lost in a single morning of fighting. The battle also exposed the fatal flaws of both commanding generals. Lee, reckless overconfidence, led him to split his army and risk total destruction, while McClellan's crippling caution threw away a chance to end the war early. Lincoln would relieve McClellan of his command just weeks later, ending his military career. Antietam National Cemetery, where thousands of unknown soldiers are buried, stands as a permanent reminder of that day's devastation. Antietam is often overshadowed by later battles like Gettysburg, but it is the true turning point of the Civil War. It stopped Confederate expansion, ended European recognition, and gave America the Emancipation Proclamation. It is a story of how a single day of violence can rewrite a nation's destiny, how caution and courage, ambition and error collide to create history. The fields of Antietam still echo with the cost of freedom, a reminder that the United States was not saved by grand victories alone, but by the blood of ordinary men who fought and died on the bloodiest day in American history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into American history, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more epic history. See you next time.